today we have Preserving Your Family Stories with Stephanie Nichols and her assistant, Helen Babcock, who has recently had her stories printed into a book, which you can look at on the table here afterwards. Stephanie grew up in town and holds degrees from Dartmouth College and Starr King School for the Ministry. She pursued a 20-year career as a Unitarian Universalist parish minister, and then in 2008 moved back to Winchester with her husband, David Boyer. Stephanie now runs Stephanie Nichols Personal History, a service that helps people create memoirs and preserve family stories. You can look up www.nicholstories.com and you can learn more about it. Helen Babcock needs no introduction to the Jenks community. She currently serves as chair of the Council on Aging and member of the Jenks Learning Connection. In addition to her career in real estate management, Helen has served in numerous roles in town over the years, for which she was recognized as Winchester's 2012 Citizen of the Year. Please welcome Stephanie and Helen.
Well, thank you, Connie, and thank you for inviting me back. I had fun doing this a couple of years ago, and it's a pleasure to come and see you again. I want to begin with a story that I was told by a narrator I'm working with in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. His name is Joe, and he is the product of a mixed marriage. His mother is Finnish, and his father is Italian. And this is a seriously mixed marriage in that area. So much so that his mother's parents refused to go to the wedding and would not speak to his father for quite some time after they got married. And this is despite the fact that they lived in the same very small town. So it's a big deal. The story I want to tell you that comes from him is from the Italian side of his family. His Aunt Rosina, married a significantly older man who contracted tuberculosis, and he wound up in a sanitarium. And Rose would drive 2 hours to visit her husband in this sanitarium on a regular basis and then drive back. One Sunday evening, Rose came bursting into Joe's home, which was Rose's brother, was his father, Francesco. Said, "Francesco, I've got a crisis. My husband in the sanitarium has changed his will by working with the priest down there, and he's going to send all his money back to Italy and not give any to me." So Francesco was at the time listening to his favorite radio program, which was accordion music, and he said, "We are not going to discuss anything until my radio program is done. Sit down and listen." So Rosina sat down, and the whole family was sitting there obediently listening to this whole radio program, and when the accordion was finally done, Francesco says to Rose, "Okay, tell me that again." Rose repeated the story, and he said, "We're going to take care of that right now. Get in the car." So Francesco drove his sister Rosina 2 hours down to the sanitarium, and they stopped at the rectory first. They left at 9 p.m. when this radio show was over. They went to the rectory, and the priest was in bed. They got him up and said, "We are going over to the sanitarium, and we're changing that will back so that my sister gets what she deserves." Well, the priest said, "Can we just do this tomorrow morning? I'll go with you, but please not tonight." Francesco said, "No. Your only question is, are you going to go like this in your pajamas, or are you going to get dressed first?" So the priest got dressed, and he was very reluctant, but Francesco took him by the arm, yanked him outside, and he pulled the car door open so hard that it bent and didn't close properly after that. He threw the priest in the car, and they drove to the sanitarium. When they got there, they found Rose's husband in an oxygen tent. And so Francesco came in and he said, "We're here to change that will back so my sister gets what she deserves." The brother-in-law said, "No, I'm not going to do that." So Francesco steps on his oxygen line. And the guy started to struggle a little bit. And he released the line and said, "Are you ready to change the will?" He said, "No, I'm not." So he stepped on it again. And he waited until the guy was kind of gasping for air. And then finally the brother-in-law conceded. He just waved and said, "Okay, okay." So So he released the Austin line, they changed the will back, and the priest, who was kind of traumatized by all this, said, we're done now, right? So goodbye. And Francesco said, oh no, you came with me, and you are leaving with me. And he threw him back into his car with the door that didn't close properly, drove him back to the rectory and left him there. And Francesco and Rosina drove the 2 hours back home with the amended will. Just a few days later, her husband died, and Rose inherited the money. So it was about 4 years ago that I began this business helping people preserve family stories and write memoirs. And I've done quite a few projects now, some of which are here on the table and some are in process. It can take a long time from beginning to end. So I have a number of projects that are going that haven't yet resulted in the book, but I've heard so many amazing stories, that being just one. These years have convinced me without a doubt that the process of preserving family stories is valuable on multiple levels. One of those is that it's fun. It's fun to tell stories, it's fun to listen to them. The process of figuring out what it is you have to say and reflecting back on your life over decades is really illuminating and interesting. And most people in interview sessions say they don't want it to end. You find out what your seasoned self thinks, has to say now about things that happened to you when you were young. It's very interesting. Lives are very rich and full of all kinds of detail, and you get to sort of explore that and see what it means to you now, so much longer, so many years after these things happened. It's fun usually, but it also takes courage, because not everything in a life was happy or interesting. Some people have most people have some painful aspects of their history where it really helps to have some support around you as you think about that when those things come up and you decide whether and how you want to transmit some of the more challenging things to future generations. And also just what it's going to do to you to dredge those things up. But I can tell you for sure that when you work through those issues and you end up with a recording or with a book, it will be the most amazing thing for your family. Watching people give these to their family, sometimes extended families, sometimes friends, it is the best possible thing that you can produce. It's also possible that telling your life stories can bring your family together in surprising ways. This happened to me, because it turned out that in our family, there was a member of my grandparents' generation who was still alive that I didn't really know about. And my mother, Corey, had a chance to meet this relative, or sort of meet her again. She just hadn't really been on our radar screen. She was my grandmother's youngest cousin. She's currently 96. And after my mother met her, she came home and said, this is a really interesting person. Why don't we see if we can get her to tell her stories? And she agreed. So we went together down to Connecticut a couple of times and had Nancy tell her stories. So Nancy, when she was 12 years old, learned how to drive a Model T, and she can still describe, using her hands, what the pedals did. She's a very mechanically oriented person, and so she will describe how a Model T works using her hands. When she was 16, she flew an airplane solo. She, during World War II, she baled hay and plowed fields. There was, I don't know if you've heard of the Women's Land Army. It actually started in World War I, but when all the men went off to war, the women went out and learned how to farm, to keep farm operations going when the men were gone. And there was sort of a Women's Land Army in World War II, and Nancy was, in a sense, a part of that. I now have a joke with her that she knows how to repair a hay baler knotter, and I didn't even know what a hay baler knotter was. She and one of her husbands built the house that she now lives in themselves. She did the plumbing herself. She survived 3 husbands. She had a dairy farm for a little while. She kept her cows, and she kept her operation so clean that she had a raw milk license from the state of Connecticut, which she was extremely proud of, because that's really hard to do. And she's on Facebook. So she's my oldest Facebook friend. And then she says, but I prefer email because it's more private, don't you think? I love Nancy. And she came into our world. We're in regular contact now on email mostly, but we have also gone down for a subsequent visit. She came into my world really because of this storytelling process. So another person who had kind of an interesting family experience related to this is Helen Babcock. So she is going to tell you her story about what happened.
Good morning. Excuse me. My name is Helen Babcock, and a few years ago I was sitting in this audience listening to Stephanie and realized that I come from a family of Irish storytellers, and every time we would tell a story, someone would say, "You should write that down," and we go, "Yeah," and never did. And I sort of sat in my brain for months before I called Stephanie, because my sisters were having significant birthdays. My sister Mary is here today. She was turning 70, Jean was turning 72. And I felt that they had stories that even I didn't know. So I gave it to them as a birthday gift, that we would sit down with Stephanie and we would tell our stories. We met at my house, and Stephanie put a small recorder on the table, and Mary Jean and I talked for hours. The stories just tumbled out. It was a wonderful, my sister Jean, she's the smart one in the family, she's in Florida right now, she wasn't sure about this at all, and the only reason she did it was a gift, and she wanted the right to change anything when we got the manuscript. She wanted to be the final say, oldest sister, final say, control, and we agreed. We grew up in public housing in an area of Boston called Charlestown, and we thought it was pretty good to live there, as the project was brand new when we moved in. So we thought it was pretty good. One day when I was 12 years old, my mother announced that we were moving out of our 425 square foot, 2-bedroom apartment, 3 girls, mother and father, to a huge 600 square foot, 3-bedroom apartment. And that's when life really changed for us. Became very interesting, and I'm going to read this section from the book. Bear with me. We wondered how we had been, glasses, so lucky to get this apartment, and then we found out. It had the fairly major drawback of entangling us with the Irish Mafia. We were living above one hitman and next door to another. Steve, who lived below us, was in a bloody battle with Whitey Bulger and the Winter Hill Gang. Steve was a sophisticated killer. He'd head out in a Brooks Brothers Glen plaid suit as if he'd just stepped out of the showroom. He would help you up the stairs with your groceries, not that you wanted to be helped, because you never knew who might be lurking outside trying to get him. There were windows in the hallway, and if Steve was there, I would whip past the window, trying to stay out of sight. Mary's friend Casey used to come at 5 o'clock every evening. He wasn't her boyfriend, so she said, but he would hang out. He was a dear friend, and one day he said, "I can't come up here anymore." Mary said, "Why not?" He said, "Someone told me I look like Steve," and he did. "And I should stay away from 105 Bunker Hill Street. So I'm going to slip out the back door if you don't mind. I'll call you." Casey is still a friend to this day, but he did not like to come to our house. Despite all the drama, I was not afraid until the time someone early in the morning knocked on our door. We had a big metal door, and instead of opening it, my mother was yelling to the person outside as she stepped to the side so she wasn't directly in front of the door. "You've got the wrong door, you want downstairs." She had positioned herself to the side and she looked terrified, which in turn scared me. It was the first time I really knew that this was not a good situation. My mother was very good at hiding. She had heard on the radio, she used to listen to the radio in bed, that Steve's nemesis had been shot, so she figured someone was coming in retaliation. Jean says I wasn't scared too often either, but one night we had people over, and this is a story Mary and I didn't know, and the phone rang. When Jean answered it, the person said, "Stay where you are, and you won't get killed." She couldn't say anything because we had company. It really shook me up. And when we told this to Stephanie, I said, "Jean, why didn't you tell us? I remembered." And she said, "Well, I put more food out and I sat by the door, so no one was going to get out." And then there was Tommy, our 2 doors down the hall. He was a hitman too. He had the nicest mother who went to church every day, and Tommy was sweet as pie to people who lived in the building, but he was a stone cold killer. Tommy also met a violent death. Steve did get shot a couple of times before he was actually killed. We would let his wife, Eleanor, take the car to go visit Steve in the hospital. And then our car would be dusted for fingerprints and our phones were tapped because we were suspect. My mother used to say, "We're so lucky. We have 24-hour police protection and we don't have to pay for it." There was always a bright, happy ending, and it kept us going. The title of that chapter, by the way, is Hitmen Make Great Neighbors. When Stephanie sent us the first draft, Jean called me. She was very upset. And when I asked her why, she said that it was the chapter entitled Hitmen Do Not Make Good Neighbors. She didn't want Steve's family to think that he was not a good neighbor, because indeed he was. So I said, "Jean, how do you want it to read?" Thinking that it would be the hitman aspect that she was having problems with. Jean replied that she wanted it to read, "Hitmen do make good neighbors." Done. I called Stephanie. We did it right away. Jean was happy. We all knew he was a hitman, but she really felt he was a good neighbor. Steve, his brother Connie, and later on Stevie Jr. all died violent deaths. Another neighbor on our floor, Tommy, was lovely to us, but also was a feared hitman and also died a violent death. I mistakenly thought, along with my sisters, that this was normal. Our coping mechanism to deal with all of this violence was definitely humor. Because my father was an alcoholic and missing a great deal at the time, my mother had to figure out how to raise 3 daughters in less than ideal conditions. She worked at the rectory, took in kids for lunch to make ends meet. We all went to work at 13 or 14 years of age to help her out. Later, she worked as a prison guard in the jail located in the basement of the Suffolk County Courthouse. I remember my son, Stephen, telling me that he was the only kid at Ambrose School who had a grandmother who was a prison guard and had even been in the middle of a prison break. Imagine that. He was quite proud of that. Back to the process. We made our changes to the script, dug up all our old pictures, and met with Stephanie one more time, and that was it. The big surprise, I think the biggest surprise for us, has been our friends' response and our kids' response to the book. My friend Anita, who lives in Florida, said, "I laughed, I cried, and then I laughed some more." One of Mary's employees asked her if it was really true because he found it hard to believe that this all happened. The process really made my sisters and I closer. My relationship with my mother had been a very difficult one, but when I really looked at what she had to do to survive and to get us where we became in life, I had a much deeper appreciation for what she managed to accomplish. Mary Jean and I have also found out that most people do not have hitmen for neighbors. As a member of the Education Committee, I suggested to Connie Stolo that Stephanie return as a speaker. Connie said that she wanted me to be present as well, me to present as well. And as far as I know, maybe someone here could confirm it, no one says no to Connie Stolo. She is very good at what she does. I would like to end this with the preface of our book. It reads as follows. We had a colorful childhood. We grew up in a housing project in Charlestown, Massachusetts, with mafia hitmen for neighbors. We lived on next to nothing, yet we could be mistaken for debutantes when we got dressed up. My mother shopped at the Salvation Army. Every dress had a story. Charlestown was full of characters, for better and for worse, and hardly a day passed without something funny, sad, or dramatic taking place. When we tell stories from these days, people frequently say, you should write these down. In the fall of 2011, we got together and reminisced with the intention of creating this small book. We have attempted to capture some of the flavor of our early years, and we hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much.
I wanted to give you an opportunity at this point to ask questions if they've come up to you, but what we're going to do next is talk about there are many different approaches to doing a project like this. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and then tell each other some of our stories. So if there are any burning questions right now, you're welcome to ask them. Okay, there may be more at the end, which is good too. What I hope is that you will end up feeling motivated to continue a project like this if you started one, or to start one if you haven't started one. And there are many different ways to skin this cat. One of the first questions is, are you the kind of person who figures out what you have to say by writing, or do you do better by talking to a good listener? Either way, you do not need a professional personal historian to help you do this. You can do it absolutely on your own. You can sit down at your keyboard or with your pad and just start writing. You can get an inexpensive digital recorder, which do amazing things these days, and you can just start speaking into it, or you can partner with somebody who will help you tell your stories into that recorder. And then somebody like me or you yourself can figure out how to transcribe and edit and create a book. Or once you have the recording, you have something special already. So I want to encourage you to think about this as not an intimidating thing. I do know, though, that it's a very easy thing to procrastinate or to get overwhelmed by. Sandy's nodding her head. We've had a project in the works for a long time, as well as a couple of completed ones that are on the table here. What I'd like to have us do is a practice where you will have an opportunity to tell some of your stories to two other people and to practice being a good listener and to those stories. So I have, in a minute you'll get a handout where I've got two possible topics you can choose. One of them is, what was your first job? And to just tell about your first job. The other option is to think about an early turning point or branching point in your life. A turning point can be something that you chose, like did you end up choosing sports versus music or art? Or did you end up deciding to study one thing and not another? Or go to one school instead of another? Or marry one person instead of another? Or not marry when you might have? That's a kind of by choice, what path did you take? And when you reached one of those branching points, what was the effect of that on your life? Another type of turning point happens in a way that you didn't choose. Like you had an illness when you were young that affected what you were able to do and what you thought about and how your life was during that time. Maybe your parents decided to move and you didn't really get to choose, but suddenly you went from one environment to a very different one. Maybe there was a storm, like a hurricane, that completely upended your life and changed it into before and after. Or there may have been a death or a divorce or something that caused a branching point early in your life. So option one is tell about your first job. Option two is pick an early turning point or branching point in your life and tell a little bit about that. In a group of three, two people are going to be listening while one person speaks. And as listeners, your invitation is to listen really deeply and to ask a question only after you've screened the question in your mind to make sure that it is designed to draw the person out to tell the best story that they have to tell. And it could be a clarifying question, or it could be a let's go a little deeper with that kind of a question, so that the storyteller is really focused on the dimensions of the thing that they've chosen to tell you about. A good question is not, oh, did you know so-and-so who lived in that same place when they were young? Or, my aunt, the classic thing you learn when you're studying counseling, oh, my Aunt Ethel had the same thing, and pretty soon you're talking about Aunt Ethel instead of the speaker. So as you're listening, your focus is on the speaker. What we're going to do in these groups of three is just take 6 or 7 minutes each, so not a long time, but long enough to tell your story and to be one of the listeners and ask a question if a good question occurs to you, and I will keep track so that you'll change around. And I would invite you to find people that you don't know very well. That's optional, but I would suggest that might make it particularly interesting to do. And if you can arrange your chairs so that you have some space around you so you can hear well, and we will pass out the handout. Yeah.
We can deviate from those questions. I'm living an experience right now.
You can absolutely pick, if you've got something else on your mind that you want to talk about right now, by all means choose it.
As long as it's not about your neighbor. I realized that in an unplanned way, the story that I chose to tell you at the beginning and the story Helen chose were both almost like mafia-type stories. You think if you don't have something this dramatic to tell, what is it you're going to talk about in your own story? But in fact, I hope you found, I certainly found, you find yourself talking about moving from one school to another, or from one house to another, or a job you had that was perhaps on the surface very ordinary, but what an effect it had on you. Valuable life stories can be extremely simple, and I frequently have people say, oh, my life hasn't been very interesting, I don't really have anything to say. Everybody
has interesting stories to tell. It's in the process of telling and in the reflection on it that you find the meaning. If you can imagine that you had stories from your grandparents or even your great-grandparents about what their daily lives were like, or what they thought about, or what was most important to them, how valuable would that be? So you have an opportunity to create something like that for future generations in your family. There are brochures here, and I hope you will each end up with one of those. My contact information is on the back. What I can offer you at this point is that if you want some help, I can do it in a couple of ways. I can just get together with you and look at what you've already got that you started with and help you think about what your next steps might be. That can happen anytime. I can do a single session recording with you where there's we have a preliminary conversation, you fill out a kind of informational form, and then we meet for either a morning or an afternoon, and I do an interview with you designed to draw out your stories. If you want to create a book, I can put you on a waiting list. I'm fortunate to have a lot of work, but it means that I can't immediately take new book projects, but I will be able to take them in a few months probably. So if you're interested in something like that, we can also talk about that. But the main thing is I hope you'll do something. Studies of adults suggest that a vital aspect of the last third of life is the creation of a legacy. Your will is the material part of your legacy, but storytelling and personal reflection and the transmission of your values is the non-material part. And you can give this gift to future generations, but in order to do that, you have to start. So you're welcome to ask questions if you have any about the way these book projects work, or the way an interview would work, or anything if you're wondering. Connie?
Tell us more about how the interview and the book project work.
How the interview and the book projects work. Each project is unique. So if I'm doing an interview process, if we're doing a single interview, you would fill out a biographical form, and we would have a conversation first to decide what aspect, what part of your life you want to focus on. Because in one interview, as you find now, you talk about one little tiny slice, and as you start peeling back the layers of that slice, you can use up your time very fast. So we would think together about what is most important to you to cover in an interview, and then I come in prepared to help you stay on track with that topic as we do our recording. And you can do as many recordings as you want. So you can do as few as one or as many as you want. If we're going to create a book, what I do is send the recording to a transcriptionist who then returns to me a verbatim transcript, and I take those and edit them into a first draft narrative. And you as the narrator are always in complete control of the result. So I write a first draft and I send it to you, and then you can read and reflect and figure out whether it says what you want to say. I was talking about tricky subjects. Sometimes those require some editing and rethinking, and you decide. Or you might realize that you left out a whole important thing that you want to add in. So we pass that draft back and forth until you're happy with it. Meanwhile, you are finding photographs that you might like to include. Some people have tons of photographs in boxes that this is an opportunity to then go through and select and organize. Some people have very few. It really doesn't matter. I can tell you that if you put photographs in your book, they will be the first thing that anybody looks at. And then they will sit down and actually read. So once we have a draft that you like, then I work with a designer, a book designer, who takes your manuscript and your photographs and lays them out, making sure that you like the design. And we proofread a couple of different steps along the way, because I have learned that proofreading it'll kill you. And my professional publisher brother says that every book that they put out at the highest level always has a typo in it. So when you have found your typo, don't worry. It'll happen. But we do proofread a couple of times. And then with technology these days, with digital printing technology, you can get the highest quality book in any quantity, from 1 to 30 to 50 to 100. You can choose your quantity. And we work with a place called Acme Bookbinding in Charlestown that does a wonderful job. And so that's basically the process. And how long it takes depends on how many interviews, how much editing, when you feel ready. One of the hardest things I've discovered for people to do is finish their memoir, because you're not dead yet. And when is it good enough? And so we usually end up with a conversation to say, you know, this is a wonderful piece like this. And of course you can always add and edit and change. But you could do that until you really are dead, and you probably want to be able to appreciate the giving of the completion of the book and the giving of the gift. But that is up to you. That's why I have so many projects that are in a pipeline that are, sometimes people take a draft and they wait a year, or they wait a month, or whatever period of time while they just sit with it and think about what they want to do next. Sometimes also there is background research that goes with it, so some people are interested in genealogy and in learning new things about their family, and with the internet now that it's really easy to do some of these things, and you can do it yourself, or I can do some of it for you or with you, and we can add details like that if you want to embellish your story in that way. Yeah.
Can you advise how to get someone who's reluctant or actually outright says they won't? Because my sister tried this with my father and his two sisters, and they all said, no, we don't want to do it. And we just stopped there because they said the reason was there were too many sad memories. Whereas we know they have those, but they also have very rich lives. So, but they seem to focus on the negative when we asked them to do it. Can you think of any way to encourage? I mean, this is, if they came to this, they'd probably love it. But, you know, they don't live around here. So can you think of any words to try or ways to encourage?
So what to do, yeah. So what to do if a narrator is unwilling? And in this case, because they feel that they have too many negative memories. I mean, the first answer is the narrator has to want to do it. You can't make them, and you shouldn't try to force them to do it. That said, if you think that an experience like this might make them realize that there are aspects of the process that they might enjoy, there are personal historians all over the country. There is, the brochure refers to the Association of Personal Historians. They have a directory, and you can find people who live many places. You can access somebody, or the next time you see them, you can invite them to tell stories with no strings attached, and if they end up unhappy with how that went, you can promise that you'll throw it away. I think it's very important that the narrator is in control. So nothing should ever go out in print or out into the world that they're not, that they haven't agreed to. And it is also true that for some people there is too much sad history and they don't want to tell it. And I think that's a shame, because to my mind, how people have handled adversity is some of the most interesting piece of what can happen, what can grow out of this, and what descendants and other people are going to want to know is, because happy times it's fun and interesting, but what happened when you had a rough time, and how did you respond, and how did you persevere, and how did that help you become the person you are today? That's really valuable. So you can say that to them, but you can't force anybody and shouldn't. Yeah.
If you have family members that live all over the country, can you go through the interviewing process by Skyping? Or is it better to be all together in the same room?
It's easier in the same room, but you can absolutely, I have a client I have never seen. And I work with her one-on-one on the telephone. We actually don't even Skype. We use a speakerphone, and she's not looking for a high-level audio recording. She's working on a book. So I set my digital recorder next to my phone and use speakerphone and ask her questions, and she speaks. And then that gets transcribed. So you can do that. And yes, you can Skype, and you can record Skype conversations. I actually haven't tried it. I know some people who have done it. Skype is improving in quality, but some people get frustrated with dropped calls and technical issues that you don't want to have, you don't want to lose. The worst feeling would be to have a great conversation and realize you didn't get it all. So you might want to test it out, but you can absolutely record phone conversations. And I think the technology is changing so fast that there are probably now other easy ways to record FaceTime, video aspect things too. Any other questions? You are more than welcome to take a look at the books on the table, to come up and ask questions privately if you would like to. Helen will be around as well. Sandy's we've done a couple of projects together, so there are some people you can ask about how it went. And I appreciate your time and attention.